Hey everyone, this is Spencer Mitchell, host of the FreightTech Fanatic podcast. And today we have Jeff Ogren from Zelh Logistics. Jeff is the president of Zelh. Zelh is a flexible staffing solution for logistics companies. Jeff, so glad to have you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And of course, our co-host, Johnny Bond. Johnny, how are you today?
Never better. Thanks for having us, Spencer.
Excellent. So Jeff, we've known each other for a couple of years now, and we wanted to have you on because you have a super interesting background, great perspective on the logistics industry, and now just recently started a company. How long ago was it? Just in the last month or two?
Yeah, we launched Zelh Logistics. It's a division of Zelh. So Zell's been around for about 5 years now as a remote staffing solution based in Eastern Europe. And about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we officially launched the logistics division, focusing our services and solutions tailored to logistics companies, so 3PLs, trucking companies, freight forwarders, freight tech companies, you name it.
That's super interesting. I mean, I want to talk a little bit later about some of the use cases and ways that companies are utilizing, because I think it gives some potential indicators to what the industry needs. But what brought you here? What's your background? How did it bring you to Zelh?
Yeah, definitely. So been a couple places, to say the least, since Zelh launched here a month ago. But back in 2012, I guess my career started in this industry as a founding team member at TruckerPath. So TruckerPath today is the #1 app for owner operators to help them find destinations, points of interest along their route from point A to point B. And that was really the first introduction to moving the industry forward, if you will, given it was a product that could be used in the palm of your hand. It was an app that you would download, you didn't have to pay for it. And in our eyes, it replaced CB radio. And so this kind of thinking was a little more forward thinking at the time. Average age of truck drivers are 53 years old. Apps weren't really as used, if you will.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So that took off. I think the timing was really good to create a platform and something that was very effective. It's definitely a time saver for drivers, whether it be finding parking spaces or looking for the right truck stop. There's a variety of reasons that they would use TruckerPath, but even to this day, 1 out of 3 trucks on the highway is using TruckerPath. So learned a lot, wore a lot of hats from the very beginning to raising our seed and Series A round. And the company is still alive and well today.
I mean, you said 2012, and that's 11 years ago in the freight industry. I mean, that's before, or freight tech industry, I should say. I mean, that's before Project 44. Probably before companies that are staples in the industry today, 2012, right? FreightTech. Now there's so much money and so much effort in the industry because of, I guess, really since COVID, right? But yeah, that's a long time in freight tech to sort of see the world change and the company being successful.
Yeah. From there, the world of freight, I think, just kind of became more under a microscope when seeing a company like TruckerPath kind of come in and not necessarily force, but encourage a different way to think about operating your truck and how you get from point A to point B, leveraging navigation and different points of interest that just help with overall productivity. And so then we started getting interviewed and all the media came out and started talking about like Uberizing trucking. Is that even possible? What does that look like? Is it going to be TruckerPath? We certainly thought so. We thought we had, with our volume of active users, we felt like we were in a good place to kind of move in that direction of now moving freight seamlessly, less touch points, the Uber way, right? That was a lot easier said than done. As you know, moving freight is very complex. A lot of things happen along the way. Drivers get haggled. There's negotiation process that happens back and forth, sometimes as many as 5, 6, 7 times before the load is actually booked. And so this wasn't going to be easy. It was something that you have to really take baby steps and show how this is going to work and be more efficient over time. And so that even today, right, the industry is not necessarily completely Uberized the process. We're far from it. But we've made a ton of strides since then.
And there isn't Uber Freight. So freight has been Uberized in some components,
right? Yeah, so it is funny because when Uber announced that we would be getting in or that they would be entering into the trucking industry, I think it was hard to fake like you were the Uber for trucking. They were clearly going to do it. And there were other players at the time kind of testing the waters. Uber Freight was definitely not the first one, but it was all about execution and scale. So given Uber's background and their DNA, no touch, seamless process within their user base, they were definitely prime and kind of set up to move kind of towards the trucking industry, right? Because they were saying, well, if we can move people and we can move food, why not move freight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a lot different. You're not local moving 5 to 10 miles away. You're talking 150 plus miles and even more, or even further in a lot of cases. So again, baby steps was important. So I had the opportunity moving forward to join this team early on.
The Uber Freight team, you mean?
The Uber Freight team very early on. And I chose that for a variety of reasons. I won't get into all of them, but I felt like Trucker Path was set up for success. But what we were offering to drivers at the time wasn't about moving freight. It was about helping them with their productivity from a navigation standpoint, from point A to point B. So to go to that same user base and ask them to do a different behavior to move freight from point A to point B is asking a lot. It's not that it can't be done, but I thought Uber was just positioned better. Their technology, there's a lot of factors I already mentioned, but they were ripe to really disrupt in this arena. And so I kind of took the chance. It was a chance because no one said it was going to just work necessarily. In fact, Travis Kalanick at the time had written a very small check to Uber Freight. And he said, listen,
that's the CEO.
That was the former CEO and founder of Uber. And he said, listen, I'm bought in on autonomous vehicles. I feel like that is the future of our company, but I'm not necessarily bought into Uber Freight. I'm going to give you guys like 6 months and you got to hit like certain metrics and milestones in order for me to continue investing in this division. So there was a lot of pressure and we didn't have necessarily a blank checkbook to grow. We had to leverage a lot of our internal resources. A lot of people were coming over from Uber Prime business, the ride sharing division, as well as Uber Eats, because they heard about it. It sounded exciting and they knew we needed help. So it was a lot of hours. It was a lot of weekends making sure that we could prove that our thesis was freight brokerage is broken in a lot of ways. It's just a lot of people in a room dialing, trying to find the right truck for its customer. And we just knew it could be better, right? And so we just started there and started really understanding the pain points. I mean, we were manually brokering loads at the time, just so we understood the challenges it really was before adding product, adding app, et cetera. So a lot of good learnings there, a lot of things we did that wasn't necessarily perfect. And it's good to see that they're doing well and still healthy.
I heard that, and this could be a total rumor, I heard that they are actually maybe being spun off or being sold as part of the deal.
Yeah, they've been in talks about that. I don't have any clear response to that, but I think it does make sense. I mean, running a ride sharing business or final mile B2C is a lot different than running a digital freight broker. And I think they've always understood that. So we might see some things change here soon, but I don't know. I don't have a timeline.
It is super interesting that they've been mentioned in the most recent earnings call for Uber. Like Uber Freight to us in the logistics industry, it's another company, right? It's a digital brokerage that has other components within it, embedded tracking, probably some components like Trucker Path in it. But then you sort of get out of the freight world for a second. And you're like, oh, Uber is doing its earnings call, and Uber Freight was mentioned in its earnings. It was like a big segment of their earnings call. It is interesting to kind of take ourselves out of freight and then see it. Public companies talking about.
They're dangling the stake. I think that's a more valuable company somewhere else.
Yeah, potentially with autonomous vehicles and autonomous trucking and those sorts of things.
I think Dara, the current CEO now, has always been very attracted to freight, to the logistics space. He was actually an investor at Convoy when he was in Seattle early on. And so he's always understood the vision. Also, it's important to note that they spun off the autonomous vehicle division too. And so I think they looked at freight in a lot of ways as a very attractive business for the company. The average load that you move is going to be a lot more your delivery or you're taking a passenger a few miles down the road. So, and then of course the scooter business, that's not panned out necessarily to be what they thought it would be. So I think they're still holding on. I think Dara still has like some sentimental feelings towards freight, but I think the writing's on the wall. So they got to get through this migration still 3 years later with Transplace. I hear that that's still some friction getting that done, but that was a really big merge, if you will. So we'll see what happens. It's interesting.
It is. Well, let's move on from Uber. That's cool, but I want to hear about Zelh. What brought you here? This is a big change from things you've done in the past. I'd love to hear the business thesis and why we should all be excited about this.
Yeah, I didn't wake up thinking I was going to get into staffing. It's never really been a dream of mine. It is now.
Unsexy businesses are now sexy businesses. That's like the thing right now.
Yeah.
Sexy. So,
yeah, it is. Yeah, the business model is very attractive. It makes a lot of sense as an investor or anyone that looks kind of under the hood at remote staffing. And when I mean remote staffing, it's important to define like what that really entails. I had to kind of learn myself and understand how the economics differ, the turnover rate, who's the employer of record, all these different components that I think honestly are really important to consider in a market that we're in right now. You know, when the market was great, you hire as many people as you need, you scale like crazy, it's great, right? Now we're in a market that's super scary, a lot of layoffs, a lot of kind of having to redefine like, where do we go from here? Even if it's in a cycle, you still have to take on these challenges that are in front of us. And so going back to your question, 3 years ago, we were doing some due diligence on a 3PL, pretty successful 3PL. And we were looking at making an acquisition and we were really attracted to the numbers. We noticed the overhead was very low. EBITDA was super healthy and they were just growing in the midst of hiring staff. And quickly realized that these staff members, ranging from a variety of services and roles to back office support, accounting, billing, IT, developers, you name it, was all being outstaffed in Eastern Europe. So it's a US-based 3PL based in Charlotte, North Carolina, growing with staff members based in Eastern Europe. And so right away, that was really interesting to see a US-based company really grow successfully this way. And today they have over 150 staff with Zelh based in Eastern Europe that's continuing to grow the company. I think they're around 250 million in top line revenue with really strong margins. So that was my introduction to Zelh, kind of on the back end when we were doing some due diligence on this company. So fast forward, the company Millhouse Logistics that I was referring to was acquired by Omni Logistics. And they're a $3 billion freight forwarder based in Dallas. And I noticed as soon as that acquisition occurred, they started adopting the staff from Zelh as well into some of their other operations from accounting, billing, track and trace, even logistics operations. And that's a big company, right? To put that much, at least a percentage or a proportion of their staff on the weight of Eastern European talent. But that's what's really attractive about, and I'll go into like Eastern Europe for a minute, is we've noticed these are very highly educated individuals. They really look at US-based companies as a privilege. It's like they've made it to work with brands, whether it's logistics, it really doesn't matter what industry. And we've noticed the work ethic is second to none. And not only just completing tasks, but really thinking outside the box. A lot of these individuals have master's degrees. So we've partnered with some of the universities in a variety of countries in Eastern Europe that has really like enabled us to be very confident in when it comes to sourcing or outstaffing individuals for our clients. Our turnover rate, I think, is really important to talk about because outsourcing can get a negative connotation because turnover can be so high and it just becomes a headache. Our turnover is single digits, and I think that's saying a lot.
Is that year over year or month over month?
Yeah, it's year over year. Because typically for the first couple of months, what you're really trying to do is understand what is the description, the role, the expectations. We don't just like choose the first resume that we come across, right? It's got to be a good fit, just as if you were hiring someone in States as a W-2. So we do take them through a level of training. It's a boot camp, if you will, for 3 or 4 weeks. They get kind of an overview of the industry. They understand the lingo. the different pieces and components, whether it's freight brokerage or asset-based trucking companies. So we feel that we're equipping them with high-level overview of this industry, but at the same time, they're your team and they're your responsibility to train them and equip them to be successful. And so I think that's important because it really depends on how the company's set up and what they prefer. We just wrote a post about business process outsourcing versus outstaffing. And there is a difference between BPO services and outstaffing. So think of BPO as a process or an activity in your company that you're just trying to get off your plate. You don't necessarily have that team today that sits within your company for maybe it's a variety of reasons. Maybe it's the cost is too high or you don't have the right individuals to lead that team. So in that case, we can take over, we can manage the team for them. We can set expectations, OKRs, and you can hold us accountable, right? The other piece of it is outstaffing. So if you already have a team in place and you're just trying to add individuals to that team at a lower cost, we prefer this model more. There's more transparency. It allows us to grow with you, and they're essentially your employees. They're your team members. We're just going to be responsible, and you're going to hold us to the highest standard of bringing the right good talent people that fits that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we are the employer of record. So we do take care of the HR costs, any firing or hiring or related costs that goes into it. So again, when you think about outstaffing and outsourcing, it can be an incredible cost savings to your organization, but you also need to think very intent on the level of quality that you're getting and that the turnover rate is low, right? So there are a lot of countries out there that you can source talent from. We actually have the ability to source over 150 countries if we want to. Depends on the client's needs, what they want. Night shift, whatever hours they might need may depend on where that particular country or that talent's coming from. So again, it's a very custom tailored solution. We don't just sit in Colombia or one country and say, this is how we operate, take it or leave it. It's really a consultancy. It's a conversation that we have that lasts several weeks to really understand how we're going to equip them and grow with the company.
Yeah, well, I think Spencer and I both clearly believe in the business model. We've got teams overseas, both in Latin America and parts of Asia. And I can definitely speak for Spencer when I say, we feel as if we're just as close with those employees as we are with the ones in the States, even the ones in Atlanta. So it's really just a matter of finding the right talent. And I thought you said something interesting that can think creatively or outside the box. Because I think there's oftentimes the stigma that you're just getting someone that can only do menial tasks, but you can really get incredible contributors from all over. And especially as a growing business that's cost conscious, it can just be such a good shot in the arm.
Yeah, and the support too. If you can go, and Johnny, within our studio, we can go to the VP of engineering, which is shared resource across the studio, and go, hey, I need somebody that looks like X, Y, and Z, has these capabilities, this level of education. You can be like, hey, I need somebody who has 10 years experience in data science with a master's, right? It's like, oh yeah, I can go out and find that person. As the CEO or a functional lead, to not have to go out and find that person yourself, but actually go out, have somebody find them for you. So one, that's the consultancy part, right, Jeff? And then two, finding resources and people that have great backgrounds. That's your access part. That's your ability to go in 150 countries, do this in Eastern Europe with master's educated folks. And then three, the ability to add two teams without taking over an entire process. That's critical as well, because it just allows you to sort of not say, hey, Jeff, you're going to do my track and trace, but hey, Jeff, I need someone now to support 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. track and trace because I've got it covered the rest of the time. But I need someone from your team, but on my team to hold them to the same standards that we have currently. So we have that model at the studio, and it's incredibly helpful to growing businesses. And I would imagine logistics companies too, because they're 24/7 operations for the most part, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's an opportunity to be really resilient against market fluctuations. We call it kind of the recession-proof model. In a market like we talked about earlier, it's really challenging right now. In a lot of cases, there's hiring freezes, and it's God, you don't ever want to hear that, right? Especially when you have people that are hungry, wanting to grow, even in the midst of chaos that's happening in the market. But I really believe like when you look under the hood and understand the cost savings and really dissect how this can be effective for your business, it does allow you to keep growing while adding more staff into your organization. It's a different kind of thinking that we would have like here in the US. Like, oh, this guy's going to cost or girl's going to cost me $35,000, $45,000. That's not necessarily has to be the case. We came across an instance recently. It was data entry. It's very basic. And we got the cost down to like $4 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a typically like a 13 to 15, even higher dollar an hour type of role and task. And should you be automating some of that? Absolutely. But this company wasn't specifically doing that at the time, which is fine. But there was a lot of ways that we could come in and help in some of the just tedious day-to-day tasks of like data entry that just gave them like a sense of comfort that they can continue to grow and not feel constrained.
Jeff, I know of a company that can do that for you. You too.
Johnny, I don't know. It might be cheaper to hire somebody to do it at that rate. Jeff, tell us a little bit about the use cases. Like, okay, so we're in the logistics industry. We need hands across the board or in certain use cases, departments. What are these that are popping up most often? And I also, I'll layer this on or give kind of like a premonition to some of these things can be automated, right? So for anyone listening, it's like, okay, these are actually the things that logistics companies need help with right now, like future technologies as well that aren't quite solved. So what sort of use cases are you guys seeing most often?
Believe it or not, accounting, billing, finance, those are high up on the list. We simplify your billing and documentation process, BOL, proof of delivery, as it's related to logistics. These are things that, oh my gosh, you could save as much as 53% to your bottom line on your overhead costs in that area. The other one, of course, is IT and development, right? Typically, companies have their own CTO or kind of leads and maybe some W-2s and full-time employees, but projects come up, deadlines come up, and some of it's just tasks that need to be done regularly that when you're talking about that particular service, that's a very expensive when you start talking about software development. All the big tech companies, even Uber, Google, et cetera, like they're doing huge amounts of BPO and outstaffing. So it's not just because you have big checkbooks and big revenue, doesn't necessarily mean you go and hire all in-house W-2. You got to also think about the health of your business, especially your bottom line. And so, front end, back end, full stack developers, UI, UX, data scientists, you name it. That is a very popular one. And then the third would be operations, right? So specifically with logistics, you're thinking about safety and compliance to track and trace, customer service like night shift, not ever missing a beat, being able to have the people in place, not feel like you're tied down to what the market's doing, but you can continue to service your customers and the carriers in the highest form possible.
Okay, Jeff, a follow-up for you there. This is maybe a little tougher one. As tech entrepreneurs, where should we be looking at opportunities for disruption and to increase automation?
Yeah, it's a great question. You can kind of take a couple of different use cases like the Uber freights or the people that improved or disrupted the freight brokerage world. I always look at it as touch points. Like, are you looking at a certain task? Are you able to minimize and count the number of touches that it takes? And sometimes that's even the case for trailers and like, are they shared truckload, full truckload, LTL? So you can break it down a lot of different ways. But I think you got to start at like just the amount of touch points that it takes to successfully complete a task. There are some companies like UiPath, for example, massive company, multi-billion dollar company, started out as a call center, literally.
I love UiPath, by the way.
Yeah.
I played around and built a couple of like RPA use cases and was like, this is great. I'm not a developer. I can do this.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's a brilliant story because they started as a very manual, like, customers call center support. And then they just found like the areas that needed less touch points or where you could get a little more efficient here and kind of sprinkled the tech alongside their processes. And it, you would never think of that now, right?
No, they're like the opposite of.
There's no employees. It's all automated. Well, that's not how it started out. So I don't think it matters whether you're a traditional company or maybe there's some things you haven't necessarily adapted yet or off the shelf or proprietary. I think you just got to get really smart with like, what does your current process look like today? Sometimes it takes outside consultants. It's not easy, right? Because you're having to force change to a process that may have been the same for 10, 20 years. And so you really got to look under the hood in your own company, whether you're COO, CEO, or a lead of your own team. Maybe it's sales, right? You're not going to automate everything in sales, but there's certainly a lot of things you can be doing and things can be working for you in the background that's allowing you to scale, leveraging tech and automation. So it's not just having to build a proprietary system. I mean, even at Uber Freight, we had no products for like 14 to 18 months. Everything was spreadsheets, Excel, and it wasn't because it wasn't built necessarily yet. It was just we were really defining where the problems and the troubleshooting occurs. And until you really know that in your business, you can't just start adapting and installing and creating all these because then it's like it could be a good solution, but you don't know how that solution really works for you, and your company may not be set up for that particular process. So I think you just got to do the hard things, right, in your company to really dissect and understand what changes need to happen. But they can be like small changes, right? You don't necessarily need to build something out of the box.
Is that part of the work that you guys do, which is to like go in and help companies think about their processes and then go, okay, now based on this, what would you need to support that or do? Like,
Yeah.
if they wanted 24/7 support on something, but like right now they have 8-hour support on it. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about your process and then get to how do you staff it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this point up because as we're finishing the website specifically for logistics,
It looks great.
oh, thanks. Yeah, all that's about to be overhauled. So
It's a good
stand
start.
by. Yeah, so I would say the challenge is that when you go to the website probably today or read anything about Zelh, we're outstaffing, remote staffing company, right? But the team that I've hired and we've brought together all come from the industry, from FreightTech to 3PL to freight forwarding, and they all have a forward kind of thinking mindset, and everyone's done a lot of consulting too in their past. And so when we do get on the phone, what we really want to do is just understand your current setup. We want to really like start having like a thoughtful discussion around what you think you're doing is right, or maybe also the pain points that you can acknowledge. And like, let's have like a real consultation here before we get into like staffing, because that is the byproduct. There's no doubt. I'm not going to discourage it, but I also want to understand like what is working, what's not working. So we're not bringing in new technology solutions yet. I think we are working on some things that will give us the ability to provide some of those opportunities for our clients. But right now, it is very much a consultancy of understanding the business today and then holding us to some of those metrics on how we can go in and improve EBITDA and improve overhead cost. And so that is where I think our sauce really lies, is the team and their experience in the logistics space.
You really have brought together, I mean, Johnny and I know some of the folks that you brought over to the team, and you really do have operational experience from freight brokerages. You have people from past ELDs and things like that. You have people from Trucker Path, people like very much the FreightTech experience, which is interesting. As an agency, I guess it does lend itself to that consulting component, right? Because I don't think you're out there like charging a premium for some of the people that I've recognized as leaders from the industry that are now on your team.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I've had to convince some of them
I'm sure
about this. You know, one of them was running one of the biggest book of business for TQL for 15 years.
Yeah.
I met him here in Tampa. And I said, look, do you want to continue to compete against 20,000 freight brokers, you know, for RFPs?
Wow,
and,
great sales pitch, Jeff. That's so good.
Or I think all these guys will be successful, whatever they do. This gives us the opportunity, though, to ask a lot of the hard questions, not just what's your freight spend? Can we get an opportunity? I think it's just, hey, we have the experience. We've been in your shoes. We've had a lot of consulting experience with clients in the past. Let us have a conversation with you to understand what you're doing versus bringing in people that don't even come from the industry. Having that conversation is going to be a lot tougher. So, you know, leadership, prospects, whoever we're talking to is very open to our conversations. It's not really a sales pitch at this point. It's more just asking the hard questions, understanding, you know, where they're at. And if there's an opportunity for us to work together, we'll certainly do it.
Mm-hmm. The use cases piece is still so interesting to me, the accounting and some of the finance, those sorts of things. But I guess, again, it speaks to the experience of the people that you have in the agency as well, not just your leaders, but the people that you hire out. I mean, I've noticed a number of freight tech companies I've got a couple clients that are from Eastern Europe that have now started companies like TMSs, shipper TMSs, carrier TMSs. John, you probably see it in the factoring space and other spaces as well. And they're fun to work with. They're super sharp. There's cultural differences, like how we haggle on contracts or like how specific we are about certain things. And I think the freight industry benefits from shaking up a little bit and sort of being turned over a little bit and going, okay, kind of like the staffing agency does, right? Why are we doing things the way we're doing them? We don't need to do them that way. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we get very comfortable and it's a very I don't know. I haven't traveled enough around the world to understand all the cultures, but I think even for us, meaning here in the US, it's tough sometimes to are we really disciplined in these areas? Are we really thinking outside the box? Are we really not taking things for granted and grateful that we have an opportunity to scale a business and to grow a business? Like those are really good reminders, right? It just makes you more grateful for what you have. And a lot of the people, and this is what I'm excited about as well, is the people that we are working with, recruiting, giving them these opportunities is one of the most gratifying things right now, because it's not necessarily the same type of living situation that we might have here in the US, right? I mean, there's wars going on. There's just all the global ups and downs that I think we take for granted. And so every time I've seen, whether we're adding more staff or we're starting with a new client, these guys just hit it from the gate. They're just super inspired. They give it, everything they have. And again, it's a testament to the turnover rate being so low. So I really love that. I know there's probably other countries that are similar. I can't speak for that, but I'm a real big fan of Eastern Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very cool. That's awesome.
I've got one more question for you, Jeff. All right. So you've been a part of now founding 3 companies in the logistics space, part of the founding teams or early teams. One piece of advice you'd have for folks that are starting their companies? I think I already know what you're going to say because I kind of know your personality, but any piece of advice or first thing that comes to mind, because now you've just gone through it again, right? And so it's fresh on your mind, starting a company.
Yeah.
What's the biggest piece?
I mean, experience is everything. If you can get a lot of experience, that's how you learn, right? Or reading books or learning from people is a huge, huge part of it. The second piece is don't be afraid of making mistakes. I think we're all very egotistic. I mean, me included, we're all, to a degree, very self-centered people, and we think we have all the answers, but that can hinder your growth and hinder you from learning new things. So I would just say, I read something recently about just don't be afraid to make mistakes, because it's when you learn from them. It's never going to be perfect, especially the first time you do something. It's never going to be perfect. Probably won't be the second or third time either. But having my 3rd kid here recently, there are mistakes and learnings that I've experienced that I'm going to try to avoid, right? It doesn't mean that I'll be perfect. So yeah, I think even if you've had that kind of experience and now we're 15 plus years in freight tech or whatever, in the industry, that doesn't mean anything. You're going to be learning and growing until you die. And so I think that should take a burden off anyone's back and just go after it, as hard as you can. There's no looking back. I mean, you have one life.
Amen. I love it.
That's kind of what I thought you'd say, Jeff, is
Okay.
Is you got to step out on the ledge and you got to fully go for it, right? Up at Brickyard to repower is they say burn the ships. That's everything.
That's great. Love it.
Burn the ships.
Great.
Jeff, thank you so much for being on with us today. Johnny, it's always good to see you. We'll talk soon, guys.
Yep. Yeah. Sounds good. See you guys.